First of all, I want to introduce our panelists that we have. We're glad to have them with us. First of all, we have from HRI, Historic Redevelopment Incorporated, Mr. Chris Clement. Come on in. Chris Clement is the member of the HRI's Development Management Team. He oversees and coordinates all phases of the project development process, ranging from initial site identification and financing through construction, completion, project development. Mr. Clement has extensive experience in implementing developments through public and private partnerships, including significant public housing developments performed under HUD's Hope 6 and the Choice Neighborhood Initiatives as well. And I'll allow him to introduce himself in just a moment. Seated next to him, of course, is Ms. April Kennedy, who is the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative Program Administrator for the Housing Authority of New Orleans. Ms. Kennedy has been with Handle in that capacity since 2012 and oversees the implementation of the Housing Neighborhoods Initiative, Choice Neighborhoods Initiative Grant Award for the City of New Orleans. And also Mr. Greg Hedrick. So we're glad to have him with us as well. Mr. Hedrick is he's the director of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas, as Director of Community Investments. Also, we have Victor Schmeltz from the Volunteers of America and their development arm, as well as Mr. Scott Pousson, who is with the United States Department of Agriculture, RD, for rural development. We're going to start and actually have them to introduce, prior to setting up there, just to say something about themselves. We've done a sort of brief introduction, but I want to give them an opportunity just to share with you who each of them are. If we start with Chris, we'll work through April and Greg, and allow them just a moment to introduce themselves and what it is that they do in particular, so that you guys get a better feel for what it is that they do. Good.
Okay. I think Louis covered me pretty well. I'm Chris Clement, Vice President, Development Management with HRI Properties. We're a national real estate firm, a lot of multifamily with a focus on community revitalization and affordable housing. Also have a lot of in our portfolio of market rate multifamily and hotels across the country. So it's a pleasure to be here and look forward to this panel.
My name is April Kennedy. I'm actually overseeing the Choice Neighborhood Initiative in New Orleans, one of the largest housing initiatives and one of the first grantees of this HUD funding back in 2011. Excited to be here, and it's going to be hard for me to keep under 5 minutes, at least 5 minutes, I'm going to tell you guys, on giving you an overview, but I'm going to do my best.
Hi, I'm Greg Hedrick. I'm the Director of Community Investment for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas. We're a wholesale bank, a bank for banks, but we provide through our member banks a number of grants that can fill the gap for your affordable housing development. So speak to that this morning. We also offer discounted loans to financial institutions so they can turn around and relend those dollars to you guys for qualified affordable housing development to help manage the cost of your transactions.
I'm Victor Schmeltz. I'm with Renaissance Neighborhood Development, and if you could keep Chris's picture up, because he's a lot better looking than I. We are.
The guy is good looking.
We are the housing development subsidiary of Volunteers of America, and we were established in 2006, initially to deal with the devastation of Hurricane Katrina around the southeast Louisiana area. We have since expanded our footprint throughout the state of Louisiana, working in a number of communities, so delighted to be here.
Hello, my name's Scott Pousson. I'm the Multifamily Housing Director for USDA Rural Development for the state of Louisiana. We provide many services to the rural areas of the state, including affordable housing, which includes single-family housing, which I do have some background in, and also multifamily housing, which we'll talk about today. Thanks for being here.
If you don't mind, welcome our guests. Give them a hand, please. We appreciate them taking the time. We're going to allow Chris and April, as they work through their presentation, take a few minutes, those 5 minutes, and work through and allow them to share with you what it is that they do and how it impacts the development and production of multifamily affordable housing.
I'm going to start off. I want to just give you a quick review over our Choice Neighborhoods grant. Hano and the city actually applied for this funding in 2010. We were awarded a $30 million grant in 2011. And Chris is right next to me with HRI as well as MBS and Urban Strategies are implementation partners. And the unique thing about the Choice program is that it concentrates on 3 different components, and that's housing, people, and neighborhood. If many of you in the room remember, Hope 6, Choice actually replaced Hope 6. And Hope 6 kind of really focused more on the particular development of public housing, and this actually gets into and actually deals with the neighborhood as well. I'm going to do this and click. This just shows you the boundaries, which I think is important as you start looking at development projects. Really, what are your boundaries? What area are you going to concentrate on? You can see that our trapezoid for this particular neighborhood is 1.75 square miles. That ended up being a plus and a negative, which Chris and I will share with you a little later as we go into some of our challenges. This is just an overview and just kind of showing you when we started our development on Iberville, which there's 2 components of housing that we have with our Choice. We have an on-site, which is the Iberville development, which is our last public housing development in New Orleans. And we also have a scattered site, off-site project that's within the boundaries that I just mentioned earlier. So you can see we have 821 public housing units on a 23-acre site, and at the time that we actually applied for the grant, we were half of that. We had about 441 households. So we'll talk about that as being a challenge as well, 821 replacement housing units. The 1-for-1 replacement, which is a requirement for this grant, which basically means as we do this development, we have to, based off of our commitment to HUD, to actually rebuild 821 units, and that's on-site as well as off-site. We talked about how housing can impact community engagement, and if you're not thinking of doing that, you're already missing the boat there. Community engagement is very important. What we did under the Choice neighborhood is that we had our community roles. We have the implementation team, which I mentioned earlier was Hano, the city, HRI, MBS. And then we had also the decision makers, and you can see that was the city and Hano. But we always had ideas coming in, taking it to that group of folks that could make the final decisions, and having all of our community as well as our residents be a part of that discussion. You cannot leave your stakeholders out. If you think you can do this, even as a developer, if you think you can do this without including your community folks, you're going to feel it on the back end, I promise you. You can see the areas where the community-based working team focused on was housing and blight, economic development, education, public safety, and cultural, which, you know, we're in New Orleans, so how do you not include that? But this is just a process and just showing you how important that community engagement component was, and you need to have that included. Even though we're talking about Choice, all of these components that Chris and I will be sharing with you today are things that you can do in your individual communities that basically deal with development. I talked about earlier how crucial it is to have the residents involved, and we did have all of our stakeholders, community partners, as well as our Iberville residents, because those are the folks that were actually living on the site that we actually relocated. We hosted, along with our development team and our community partners, we hosted many community charrettes, and they were actually part of all of the decision making that we did with this particular project. The residents actually elected a 7-member group called the IRWT, and that particular group worked on design implementation. I mean, I can remember the nights that we were there with our architects, with the developers, and they were at the table, and the residents actually elected them. So I cannot stress that enough. Do not leave out your residents. It's crucial that you do that. The other point to this is that as we did that, we established planning principles. That was important too, because you can't just start this project and not know exactly what you want to get out of this particular project. So you have to be focused, and all of that comes out of that initiation with the community partners as well as your residents. We knew that we wanted true mixed income. So we also knew that we wanted at least 300 public housing units that would actually go back to the site that was actually 821 at the time. It was also important that there was an historic street grid, and Chris is going to talk a little bit more about this, that we wanted to bring back so that particular development would flow better. So that was important to us. We also wanted to make sure that we preserved some of our historical buildings. For this particular site, we ended up saving 16 historical buildings. So we had to rehab those. Though that was basically more, we had more historical units that we saved under that development than we did out of our other big four, which were some of you folks that are not from New Orleans. Those were the other public housing sites that we were able to redevelop, and actually a couple of those had post 6. And then we definitely wanted to be able to keep some of the oak trees and the history from that, as well as the green space. So you have to end up knowing which goal you're going after and establish those planning principles. Now Chris is going to talk about the development itself.
Okay, so April gave an overview of the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative and also identified the Iberville Public Housing Redevelopment as really the catalyst for implementing a huge city transformation. Wall Street Journal did an article that I completely agree with, as I'm sure April will, and all of our partners at LHC and otherwise. It was difficult, but hopefully you'll agree that this was well worth it. I'm going to go through this very quickly. I know we're short on time. You can't talk about the Iberville Tremaine neighborhood without touching on the history of New Orleans. This was the area of the Mississippi Delta. Indigenous Americans settled here since the beginning of time. Also, if you look on the left side of the slide, this was where the high ground was. So when they settled New Orleans, this is where it was. This didn't flood, you didn't have levees. So the initial French and Spanish settlements were on this site. Of course, the culture. The Congo Square, where African American or slaves can go dance and sell their goods at market. The Mardi Gras Indians, Treme, famous from HBO, huge music, second line. Also in that history, and this is the most colorful part of it, was that this site sat on Storyville. Storyville was a red light district. City of New Orleans at some point said, we're not going to get rid of brothels and saloons, let's put them in an area of the town that we can control. That led to, some would argue, the birth of jazz. Louis Armstrong, Jerry Will Morton all played and learned their craft in the saloons here. So 1940s, much like the rest of the public housing developments in New Orleans, the project was let out for bid. If you look at the left side of the screen, $2,933,000, which I think is maybe like $20,000 a unit. So luckily LHC has different TDC limits nowadays. And this really was viewed as a phoenix rising. This was, they demoed Storyville. People got sick of the brothels and saloons, and they said it's just morally corrupt. This was viewed as a revitalization of the neighborhood, good quality public housing that people could afford. And then of course all the architectural influences on the site, which we'll talk about in a second. These are all additional stakeholders influencing what we did in the project. And that includes the historic buildings themselves. So touching on all the stakeholder principles and what we wanted to accomplish on the site, we thought we had gotten there with this master plan. Wow. And then we started performing our HUD-required archaeological investigations and discovered that the historic St. Louis Cemetery number 1, you can see it on the far right, historically extended about 2 blocks further than it is now. They removed the walls, they removed the headstones, but did not remove the remains. So by state law, that is still a cemetery, can't be developed unless you decommission it. Lengthy, expensive, and not really
Yeah, we looked into that.
palatable anyway. So what does that mean? We had a master plan, we thought we were done. All of a sudden, we just lost 2 out of 10 blocks. So we had the same amount of units to build with 20% less developed land. So you can see on the left is where we were. When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. We have a cemetery we can't build on, so let's take advantage of a rare opportunity for a urban inner city community park, which is what we did.
So you put a park where the bodies were?
Yes. By state law, the cemetery is a
Where they
park.
currently are?
Correct. Now, there's no superficial indication of anything there. Had we not dug, do an archaeological investigation, we never would have known.
Right.
But it's not, it's a contemplative area, it's a quiet area, it's green space, which by state law is equivalent to a cemetery. Cemetery is a park. Legally, we're able to do this, and again, it was the most palatable thing to do there. We had to do something, we couldn't just leave it blighted open land.
And we're from New Orleans, we get cemetery.
But the bodies are still
We
there.
did- Yes,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
could not, we could
That was the
not,
key thing.
yeah,
That was, yeah.
we could not disturb that, that property.
So just,
There were buildings over them before, right?
correct.
Yes.
They estimated there were about 7,000 sets of human remains still intact on site. So somehow, they knocked down the cemetery, built Storyville, knocked down Storyville, built Iberville,
Yep.
and missed 7,000. It had to have come up, but ignored. This is where we are today. Again, seeing the high-density public housing buildings going to a strategic preservation of historic buildings in the core, and then new construction, multifamily, and townhomes on the sides. Again, just more examples of where we are today. Louisiana Housing Corporation made this all possible. Their partnership, as you see here, and I stole this from one of their slides. Not only was it this direct investment of $226 million in 18 projects and 1,256 households, the ancillary benefit spread throughout the entire neighborhood and did just what Choice Neighborhood was intended to do, which was encourage and spur reinvestment. So now we have 1,400 units scattered, new housing units scattered throughout the neighborhood, including all but 80 of the required replacement units that we need for the project.
On the C&I, we said earlier that the C&I basically has three components, and one of those components is the people side of this, which is the case management and supportive services and how you network all of that. I told Chris I wanted to talk about this because the fact that out of the $30 million grant, the people component ended up costing us probably close to $4 million. But we were able to endow some of those funds to almost $500,000 of those funds. But we were able to leverage on our people side $21.2 million. So when you start talking about partnerships and leveraging, there's no way we could have done this project just with the choice money, right? There's no way we could have done it just with the state money. This is city, this is all of our partners, our community folks. But the fact that we were able to leverage $21 million just on the people side is major.
Also resulting from the physical development of housing, which is really the main intent of a lot of the programs that funded this. There was a very tangible, very real benefit to the people of the community. Just on the on-site development alone, 325 Section 3 individuals were hired. That accounted for over 40% of every new hire that was brought onto that site. 180 Section 3 training positions, including commercial driver's license, security guard, firearm training, nurse's assistant, and of course, construction training. These were real certified programs that benefited almost 200 people. And then the real number, $52 million in total contract value performed by DBEs, WBEs, and Section 3 firms. Again, spurring investment just directly adjacent to the project, almost $750 million worth of development, public and private, since the work started on site. And then credit to Providence for this slide, as well as LHC, including the state's investment in the biomedical district, $4.4 billion worth of investment in the choice neighborhoods over the past 10 years.
I'd like to just ask a question. That process of choice neighborhood, can you just give us briefly what that process entails in getting choice neighborhoods identified and how that's actually done?
Yes, and Chris and I can both talk about that. I actually came on board once the funding, they had been awarded the funding, but I know being on board at this point and then looking back, there was a lot of pre-work that had to happen. I mean, we ended up basically getting our teams together, figuring out what we wanted to do, and all of this kind of pre-planning stuff a year before we even applied for the grant. Finding somebody to write the particular grant, which we did that as well, and IRC, which was made up of HRI and MBS, pulling together all the resources, doing the community work, seeing what part the city could play, because the one thing that I didn't mention was that we ended up partnering with the city of New Orleans. Now, what they require through choice is that every city partners, every community that goes after money partners with that particular city. We did that. We were like, even out of the first 5, being one of the first 5 that were awarded, we actually had already partnered with the city. So you have to end up looking at what properties you're going to go after, because what happens is you have to decide, when you submit your application, you have to already have those particular properties as well as ownership of those properties. So there was a lot of pre-due development that goes on before you even submit the application. HUD comes down, the site visits, so, yeah, you can't just say, oh, I'm gonna do a choice.
Right.
And then the next day apply for a choice. There's a lot of pre-work that has to happen. Chris, you wanna add anything to
Just
that?
something that was perfect, but just to supplement it very quickly, a major driver of establishing a choice neighborhood and what we were going to try and accomplish there is a number of units that you have to produce. The point of the program is to de-densify, deconcentrate poverty. So we could go find 23 acres and build 821 public housing affordable units again. That doesn't accomplish what the program intends. So that means you're building mixed income, which means you're not building 821 units, you're building 2,000 plus units that have market rate workforce. So when you look at defining an area, you need to have an inventory of available property or buildings to be rehabilitated to accommodate that 2,000 plus number of units. And that's a huge piece of getting the application together, and it's a huge problem or concern maintaining site control throughout what could be a 10 or 15-year project for those properties.
And right now, I think Louisiana has about 5 designated cities that are identified as choice neighborhood. It's a HUD designation, and it's a process to get through to get there. But we know that Louisiana is not just all urban. There are some, most of the state of Louisiana, of course, is rural. And I want to give Scott an opportunity to share with you what it is that his department does at USDA, and it's in rural development and the production of affordable housing from their standpoint, and what it is that they bring to the table. Scott.
Thank you, Lewis. Well, we're here to talk about affordable housing, but I'd be remiss if I didn't also give a quick plug to our other programs and services that we provide to the rural areas of Louisiana. We used to say that we could build a town from the ground, but actually we can build a town from under the ground because we also provide water and sewer, in addition to community facilities, medical facilities, electricity, broadband, business loans and grants, in addition to affordable housing, which includes multifamily housing rental properties, which I'm involved with, and also our single-family housing program. So just wanted to give a quick plug. I don't know if Brian Lewis is in the room. He's our single-family housing program director, and they do direct loans and guaranteed loans for home ownership, and also for home repairs to very low income. So just a quick plug for those programs. But as far as multifamily housing, in the state of Louisiana, we have an existing portfolio of 515 properties, about 370 properties that we service. Many of those properties need rehab. We also have properties that are not in the program that also need rehab and need the preservation. So what I'm going to talk about today is our Section 538 guaranteed loan program. This program is a program where USDA can provide a 90% guarantee to an approved lender in order to do either new construction or acquisition and rehab. And it's only in the rural areas, so keep that in mind. Our definition of a rural area in housing is up to 35,000 in population, which covers a big portion of the state. Typically, this program is mostly a gap funding product. It works very well with low-income housing tax credits, home funds, and other funding sources. If you have a tax credit deal, typically most of the equity in the development will come from the tax credit equity. And if there's a gap need to fill additional funding, then this 538 guaranteed loan program is very helpful. The pictures you see on the slide there is actually a really good success story in Leesville that we were involved with this 538 program called Twin Lakes of Leesville. Barbara Koveski, the Leesville Housing Authority Executive Director, and Holly Knight with BGC Advantage worked really hard and formed a great partnership to pull all this together. It's really a perfect example of a partnership between federal, state, local, and private entities to put this together. It was Twin Lakes of Leesville was based upon the Leesville Housing Authority, which was made up of 4 sites, 194 units that needed rehab desperately. Came out to about a $23 million project when it was all said and done. As far as the funding sources, they had the 4% tax credits, home funds, PHA funds, and our 538 guaranteed loan, which, like I said, filled the gap. It was about a $3.5 million guaranteed loan that we provided to Bellwether Capital Mortgage. Like I said, it's just a great example, and you can see the first picture. It was from the grand opening. I think someone local there painted that. The second picture you see on the screen there was actually from the groundbreaking. And I get a smile every time I see that picture. I mean, that's what we're here for. These are actual children of families that lived in the housing authority that were getting their units rehabbed. And actually, that photo was the cover of our 2016 annual report for Louisiana. So, very proud of it. A little bit more about the actual 538 guaranteed program. Like I said, it's up to a 90% guarantee against any future loss, possible future loss on the loan. New construction, rehab, with or without acquisition. The rehab must come out to at least $6,500 per unit in order to qualify, and there is a minimum size amount of the project is at least five dwellings. The most popular option is the permanent guarantee. Twin Lakes of Leesville was a permanent guarantee. JP Morgan Chase did the interim construction loan, and we came behind with the 90% guarantee on the permanent loan. But they do have option 2 and option 3, where we can work with a more construction to perm type product and do the guarantee. All hard costs, soft costs can be included. Eligible borrowers, you can see individuals, partnerships, nonprofits, for-profit corporations, state and local agencies, trusts, and Indian tribes. Like I mentioned, we're only in the rural areas. The actual location of the project has to be in an area up to 35,000. And if you go on our rural development website, we actually have a mapping system where you could actually plug in an address and see our eligible areas. We're actually looking for more eligible lenders more locally. Most of the lenders that work in this program are national lenders that have a whole department set up to do these guaranteed loans, which they're very knowledgeable. And the lenders love it. Like I said, they can get up to that 90% guarantee. The interest rates are fixed. They get credit towards CRA in their communities, and they can also sell the loan on the secondary market. As far as loan to value, for-profits 90%, nonprofits 97%. The interest rate, we don't set the interest rate. That's negotiated between the lender and the borrower. And the terms are what really makes this attractive too. The lender can go up to a 40-year amortization and term with a minimum of 25 years.
Is that for both rehab and new construction?
Yes. The program is income and rent restricted. Income, the tenants are certified upon initial occupancy. They have to be at or below 115% of the area median income, which basically is the moderate income level. And those income limits, we follow the same income limits. If you're familiar with our single family guarantee program, we follow those same moderate income limits.
How long will they come up to be at that level?
They change every year. We use the HUD limits, and so basically they're published every year. So it's whatever the AMI is that year, 115% of that. Let's say rent restricted, the tenants pay no more than 30% of 115% of the AMI for rent. That includes utility allowances. And the average rent of the project for all the units cannot exceed 30% of 100% of the AMI, adjusted for family size. These are some more photos from the grand opening of Twin Lakes in Leesville. Again, this was a very successful project. The first photo, they did a brand new office, I think, which also houses the Leesville Housing Authority. Redid the laundry room. You can see the exterior, and brand new modern kitchens, and it was a complete rehab from top to bottom. Again, 4 sites, 194 units. So, like I said, a perfect example of everyone connecting and partnering and making this happen. Another interesting thing about this project, it was the first in Louisiana to go through the RAD conversion, the HUD Rental Assistance Demonstration program, which allows these housing authorities to convert to long-term Section 8 contracts, and also to access these public funding sources and private funding sources by going through that RAD conversion. So this was the very first one done in Louisiana.
The USDA and RD has been an integral part of what LHC does across the state in putting these loans together, the different funding mechanisms. How many of you are already familiar with, you've heard it twice already, the low-income housing tax credit program? How many of you are familiar with that? Very good. Then you know that in that, as Scott mentioned, the equity portion fills only one portion of that, along with permanent financing. There's always a gap somewhere that needs to be filled, and so we're appreciative. I have actually been at the Twin Lakes of Leesville from their groundbreaking before construction, and then going back again to see it after they had been built for their grand opening, and the transformation was astronomical. And to hear the testimony of some of the residents as well, to hear them just talk about how glad they were to see what had been done, and having a letter read of one of the tenants who was there that was in a wheelchair, and a unit being outfitted to some degree beyond just the 504 standard, to allow her to be able to access all areas of that home to provide care and cooking and the necessities for children and grandchildren, just made all the difference in the world. So it's not just the units, but these are real live families that are being affected by what it is that you all and what we do and what you all do. And so we're appreciative of that. Want to give Greg the opportunity from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas to share with you another resource that's available as they make grants available to developments, to communities, and what it is that they're doing as far as putting together these case studies and just showing you examples of what's available, what's out there, and what it is that that they do. So without that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
All right. In my intro, I shared with you who we are. As a wholesale cooperative bank, we work through local financial institutions, several of whom are in the building and in the room here. I know we've got folks that know about our programs from Home Bank, Investar, The First, Hancock Whitney, Red River, etc. There's 128 financial institutions in Louisiana that can access the programs we're going to talk about today. So get to know your banker. There are 11 home loan banks across the country. These are the 5 states that we work in out of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas. We are self-funded. So our main line of business is lending money to other financial institutions. That little list down there, banks, credit unions, CDFIs, etc. The more they borrow, the more money we make. We take 10% of that money and help fund the programs that provide grants for affordable housing. So 10% of that money goes into our programs. Our big programs, the Affordable Housing Program, you can get up to $750,000 for your affordable housing program in the form of a grant through the competitive process. That application opened up on Monday. So if you're doing a deal now and you need $750,000 or up to that amount to fill a gap in your deal, take a look at it. It's a good opportunity to help do some extra stuff with your project. It's all done online. So go to FHLB.com and you'll find a link to the application. You can get registered and start working on it. If you're doing affordable housing that provides opportunities for folks at 80% or less of AMI, you can use our money. All the grant subsidy has to be used to create or rehab housing at that 80% or less of area median income. This is a property in New Orleans, the Deaconess. Gulf Coast Housing Partnership did this a couple of years ago. It involved LHC, 4% tax credits. Also a home loan bank grant from us of $400,000. What was unique here is 2 other home loan banks also provided AHP grants. So there are a total of 3 AHP grants on this project. As I said in my opening, we fill gaps. There were gaps here. So they were smart enough to go talk to their bankers in different places and get multiple AHP grants. 4% tax exempt bond deal, home, CDBG. I want to point that out because AHP can go with anything. On rental deals, we do have a 15-year compliance period. our deed restriction gets put on the property, just like Allura, but we don't have to have a particular priority. So if you've got 5 other sources of funding and they've all got compliance things that have to be put on the property, we can be in 5th place. It's not a big deal for us. This is in New Orleans. It's a great project. If you get a chance to look at it. I'm going to show you real quickly another deal. This is actually in Texas, but the similarity is that it uses 9% credits. Just another example of how AHP can go with just about anything. It's a rural rehab deal in El Campo, Texas. Seniors deal, completely redone inside and out. Great project, upgraded everything. Really did a nice job here. So how do you get one of these grants? As I mentioned, it's an online application process. You've got to go through your banker, who's a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas. We've got a list on our website at fhlb.com. You can look at membership and figure out if your local bank is a member and go from there. It's a scoring process. So everything is done based on score. There's another document on our website called an AHP implementation plan. That's the guidebook, that's the playbook you want to follow. It has the scoring in it. This gives you a high-level view of the types of things that score points. The only scoring category that has any changes in it this year from compared to last, if you're used to the AHP, is in this community stability section. There is an emphasis in the scoring for rental projects. We do have a couple of other programs that are solely for home ownership. One's for owner-occupied rehab, and others for first-time home buyers. So those are separate deals. Thus, our competitive program has a scoring advantage just for rental deals, and it's based on the size of the project. So you score 7 points if your project has more than 75 units in it. Community stability. This is a section that involves picking up to 3 of the components to score up to 9 points, and then there's also a preservation piece where you can score an additional 3 points if your project qualifies for that. So going through this real quick. Round opened on Monday, closes on May 16th. So you do have a deadline you've got to meet to get your application in. If you hadn't heard of us until just now, start talking to your banker if you're interested in applying, because most of them have a process that starts much earlier. So start talking, have that conversation in the hall, buy your friendly banker a cup of coffee or something, and go from there. We approve the applications that score high enough in October. So there's a several month period where we're underwriting these applications. Not only do we look at the score, but we want to make sure that the project is going to actually make. You've got 3 years to use the grant funds and have your project be completed. We underwrite the grants like it's a loan, but we ask for information that you're also going to provide to your banker or your investor, so there's not a lot of duplication there. Here are some other things that come along with compliance if you are successful in getting a grant. I'll tell you, we are typically oversubscribed on a 3-to-1 basis. Last year we had 100 applications. We were able to approve 29. So we go through the applications based on score until we run out of money. We had about $14 million available in grants last year. We're over $16 million this year. So a little better odds for success going forward. I mentioned briefly we've got a couple of other programs that are very specific to home ownership. The first one is HELP. It is for first-time home buyers, again for under 80% of AMI, but they can get down payment and closing cost assistance of up to $10,000. SNAP is owner-occupied rehab. HELP is open and available right now. SNAP was open in January. All the funds, the $2.25 million, was committed in 16 minutes. So, yeah, we had so much volume that we actually added money to it. We're going to fund about $2.9 million in these owner-occupied rehab grants. There are a lot of community-based organizations that are helping elderly and disabled homeowners stay in their homes, fix things, get things going. It works great with weatherization programs as well. We're going to change that application process for next year so it won't be a mad sprint. DRA is disaster recovery assistance. It is similar to SNAP. It is for renovation of homes that have been destroyed or damaged by natural disaster. Right now we've got 2 active disasters in our district. Both are in Texas. So hopefully it's not needed in Louisiana anytime soon, but it's there if we need it. Right now we've got $466,000 in that program for low-income homeowners. This is a program that we fund. It's called Haven, outside of our 10% commitment. So it's above and beyond the programs we just talked about. This grant program is set up specifically to assist post 9/11 disabled veterans or active duty disabled service members. This talks about the number of individuals across the country that could be served by this program, and it's the driver as to why we do it. We've got $300,000 allocated this year for the program. We've already spent about $37,000. This grant program is much more flexible than the others. The upper income level for this program is 165% of AMI. We want to be able to broadly reach the disabled veteran community, the post 9/11 community here, to help them with either renovating their home or to help them get into a home and adapt it for any special needs that they might have. All this is on our website. Would certainly encourage you to check it out. This is the details. Again, this is in your sheet. But Haven program is a great opportunity to give back. The one other thing we did add this year is Gold Star families are also eligible to apply for this assistance. So if someone's lost a loved one in the line of duty, they can also receive this assistance as well.
And I was glad to hear Greg mention the percentage of funding compared to what's available and what applications. Anybody who's been through LHC's 9% funding round will recognize that that's about the same. It's about a 3-to-1, sometimes 4-to-1, because we get in about maybe 50, 60 applications sometimes, of which we can fund probably about a dozen of those. And it's just because, as he said, the money runs out. It's based on scoring, and you score until the money runs out. They're in the funding round now. LHC's 9% round is expected to take place around July, August. So you have some time to pull those together. And so get your commitments from Federal Home Loan Bank and then apply for tax credits, and you're on your way. So we look forward to it. Thanks a lot. Victor?
Okay, thanks, Louis. I'm going to stand up because I can't sit for too long. So we've done about a dozen developments around the state, and I'm going to just hit on some basic ideas, concepts, things that we've learned, things that we try to do. They may or may not work for you, and this example I'm going to show you is in New Orleans, but I tried to pick an example that would have applications that you could do this in any community throughout the state. One of the first concepts that I want to talk about, or one of the few, is the importance of neighborhood, and feeling like, to the extent we can, we try to pick sites and opportunities that are part of a neighborhood or an area that has some kind of a feeling of place. Gentilly, long-standing neighborhood just outside of, not far from Tremé, as a matter of fact. But we also like this because we had institutional neighbors. We had Dillard University across the street. There was a shopping center immediately adjacent. There's transit. All of the kind of good things that you look for in just basic quality of life attracted us to this site. And again, that's something that you can do anywhere. It was a property that had been vacant since Hurricane Katrina. We did a complete rehab of the property using the 9% program and community development block grants. So LHC and OCD were instrumental in making this development happen, and they have been, and certainly in others. But one of the other things that we really try to do is look at the bones and then try to make a qualitative decision. Is this structure, or the basic configuration of this property, worthy of being saved? And in this case, this is two 75-unit buildings that were each with 2 courtyard buildings. But it was, the shell was Chicago brick. Well, Chicago brick was barged to New Orleans in the 60s. They knocked down a bunch of warehouses in Chicago, brought it to New Orleans, and the sand content in Louisiana brick is higher. So this was really high quality brick. So we said, okay, the structure is decent, it's got this great shell. We couldn't afford to build this today. So we felt like that was enough to make it worthy of being saved. But you know, it's pretty grim. I mean, these were pretty ugly courtyard buildings, kind of that old motel entry. But just by thinking about what can we do with design to make this a little bit more appealing, often it doesn't cost a lot of money. You know, we put in these green screens, we tried to break up the monotony of the facade. We put a little glass box community building, because you got to have a leasing office and common areas. And so just try to take what's there and enhance it. And by doing that, you make an environment that is something that you can't really get in just a garden variety of new development. And so one of the real advantages, I think, of rehabs, carefully chosen and carefully executed, is that you can make a really special environment, and you bring a property, you know, that's not had a lot of care and attention over the years, and that the neighborhood may have some real sentiment about. You bring it back into commerce, and so there's a lot of sort of subjective, intrinsic benefits. Another view of that courtyard, and you know, we added just some simple wood delineation to the facade, to the rail, and again the green screen, and thinking about how people are going to use the courtyards. And the residents really love it. This was one of our favorite parts. This was like a throwaway space between the two buildings. It was just like this concrete drive. And by reorienting those are bedroom windows, but by reorienting the entrance to those units, we create these little private backyards for people to come out and enjoy and make a main pedestrian access to the units. So those units rented up the quickest. This was a mixed income development. It was 40% affordable, 60% market. Even in our market rate units, we try to keep the rents, you know, $100, $200 a month below otherwise prevailing market rents, just so there's an advantage. But basically just rebuilt the interiors, opened up the kitchens. A lot of times you find these tight galley kitchens in these 40-year-old properties, and just by knocking a hole in the wall and putting a counter, you know, just thinking through how we can, you know, take what's there and make it a little bit more special. That's a view of our little glass box community space that spills out into the courtyard. Oh, this is our little stylized Mississippi River running through the courtyard and the street grid of New Orleans. Couldn't do a swimming pool, but we did this little street light that was also one of those misters, you know, like when you go to Disney World or something. So the kids love playing in that. Just a couple things about the numbers. This was about a $20 million development between acquisition, construction, and soft costs. Funded, as I said, with housing tax credit equity, CDBG funds. We had some FEMA support from other developments that we moved to this one. We had private foundations. We had TCAP. I mean, this was really a multi-layered financing to pull this together. Lastly, it was mentioned earlier, April mentioned the importance of working with your community, your neighborhood groups. I mean, everybody knows that, but to really be serious about it, we reached out early and engaged the folks at Dillard, the Sugar Hill Neighborhood Association, who started this process very skeptical. I mean, what are you guys going to do here? And you know, what's this really going to wind up being? And we developed a dialogue over several months. We actually wound up doing a good neighbor agreement where because there was a lot of angst about, you know, rental housing and what's, you know, we're going to have all these problems in the neighborhood. So we actually wrote it down. Here's what's going to happen if there are issues around the property. What we're going to do, if you have issues, you know what you're going to do, and have regular meetings and dialogue between the community manager and the neighborhood. I mentioned LHC, OCD, incredible role in making this possible. We can only do so much. I mean, we can put the transactions together, but then we have to convince our state and local partners that this is a good idea, and we were fortunate enough to do that on this one. As I mentioned, assess the bones. Are the bones good? If so, great. We actually looked at, you know, an option of would it be better to demo this? And for a lot of reasons, objective and subjective, this is worth preserving. we try to make smart decisions about what improvements to make. Our budgets are limited, we can't do everything. Where are we going to get the most impact, both for livability and long-term sustainability? Keeping an eye on long-term operating costs. With rehabs, you know, you can do the best due diligence. There's always surprises when you start digging into it, so being able to smartly control costs is important. And then, as I mentioned, take what's there to enhance it to make a really special environment. So thank you, Louis.
Thank you, appreciate it. I know that the hour has been certainly well spent. Hopefully you guys have got some great information. Do we have anyone with any questions before we exit? Anyone that, no? Fantastic. We thank you guys for coming. Give them a hand. I appreciate all of their help.